like to welcome everybody to the 2014 May 28th City of Rapid City Legal and Finance Committee. Our first order of business will be the roll call and determination of a quorum.
Laurenti?
Here.
Doyle? Wright?
Here. Thank you, and I'll remind everybody, please put their cell phones in the vibrator off position. Not that off's a position, but anyway. Next order of business will be the adoption of the agenda. Do anybody wish to add anything to the agenda or delete? No lights, I'll now entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
A motion by Doyle, second by Laurenti. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we now move on to general public comment, which general public comment is a time for any member of the public to express or discuss any concerns of the council on any issue not on the agenda. Action will not be taken at the meeting on any issue not currently on the agenda except for placement on the agenda by unanimous vote of the council members present. I currently have no speaker requests for anything for general public comment. Anybody wish to speak on anything that's not on the agenda? I will move on. And we can welcome Alderwoman Peterson to the group. Now I'll move on to consent items numbers 1 through 21. I will open public comment for consent items numbers 1 through 21. I have no speaker request forms at this time. She's here for questions only. No speaker request forms. Tamara, you'll stand for questions if you're needed. Otherwise, okay. Does anybody wish to speak on any consent items 1 through 21? I'm now going to close public comment on those items and go to the council light to see if anybody would like to remove any of the items numbers 1 through 21. Chair recognizes Jerry Wright.
Item 2 and 10.
Items number 2 and number 10. Any further? I entertain a motion to adopt the items numbers 1 through 21 exclusive of 2 and 10. Motion by Peterson, second by Doyle. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Item number 2 is authorize mayor and finance officer to sign employment contracts between the City of Rapid City and Pauline Sumption, Brett Limbaugh, Terry Waltersdorf, Jeff Barbier, Joel Landine, Jeff Bigler, and Mike Maltervern. Chair recognizes Jerry Wright.
I'd like to make a motion we send to council without recommendation, and if I can hold the floor after in a second.
A motion by Wright to send to council without recommendation, second by Peterson. You have the floor, sir.
Motion's being made, Mr. Perone, because many of the council members want a little more time to look at the details and so forth. I think the concept's okay, but we need to look at, this is the first time we've seen the full content.
Any further
So
comment?
that was Monday.
Chair recognizes Bonnie Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I would also like to have reassurance that our department heads are willingly and happily signing this document, not necessarily right now, but before Monday. Thank you.
Do we have any further discussion on item number 2? The motion is to send to council without recommendation. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Item number 10 is to recommend approval of an additional $7,570.85 from the CIP contingency for the Journey Museum HVAC system repairs for a total of $57,570.85. Chair recognizes Jerry Wright.
I make a motion to approve of the second. I'd like to have the floor, please.
Motion by Wright, second by Peterson. You have the floor, sir.
I only pull this to indicate the discussion that occurred at agenda review yesterday that CIP being tapped for the Journey Museum, and I think that in our budgeting process, we as a council and the mayor and his staff, we need to be looking at being more, I'd say, preventative maintenance oriented towards these buildings and allocating money for them so that we have the adequate resources to address the needs throughout all of our buildings, whether they're the Journey or the library, the fire stations, or whatever. And I think that it's time we get a little more realistic on our capital outlay and maintenance for buildings. That's it. Thank you.
And Bonnie Peterson.
I just want to tell our president, Jerry Wright, that he's very smart and insightful, and I encourage him to pursue that. Thank you.
Please don't encourage him. Okay. Any further discussion? The motion is to approve. All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Now we're on to non-consent items, numbers 26 through 25 through 22 through 26, excuse me. I'm now open public comment on those items, and I have Miss Vicki Fuss. I'm not sure, ma'am, which item you wish to speak on, but if you could approach the microphone over here, identify yourself. Just wait till you get the microphone, please, ma'am. That way we can get it on the record. And you'll have 3 minutes to speak. The green light indicates to begin. The yellow light will tell you when you have 30 seconds in it. The red light, please wrap up your comments, please.
Okay. I'm a recent owner of two pieces of property on 11th Street and 1107 Kansas City Street. My proposal is that the listed items for what is making it contributory to do the things that I want to do, the aluminum siding and to wrap the windows and to preserve the buildings, all those items that are considered contributory will be maintained. There was a list of 5 of them on there. And the symmetrical fenestration, which is a window design, that will all remain the same. The side gables will remain the same. Pedimented entry will also remain the same, but it will be enhanced, improved, wood changed. The multi-lighted wood door, we can't really do a wood door, but it will be a multi-lighted door, so all the appearances will remain the same, and the opposing chimneys remain the same. The one building was painted 5 years ago, and if you looked at the pictures, you can tell that how the paint has rolled away. We've already got over half the siding done in one building, and we're stopped. When I purchased the property, I had no idea that it was part of the historic district. Now, the survey done in '92 said that is not contributory on both buildings. The national survey says that it is contributory. However, it has it listed as a house where it's a fourplex. Both buildings are fourplexes. They're exactly the same. When I purchased them, I was familiar with some other buildings that are built exactly the same by the same people. And these are pictures of 20 years later with the vinyl siding. And this is exactly what I want to do. I've tried getting hold of painters. Painters won't paint it. They refuse to work in that area. My goal is to have both buildings look exactly the same, bring them up to date, have their appearance improved, the preservation of the buildings improved, and make it look better. If you can tell that, I mean, I can show you these pictures, but by putting this vinyl siding and wrapping all the windows, it's only going to preserve it. We're really not taking anything away, and I still don't understand why it's really even considered part of the historic listings.
Thank you, ma'am. And for the record, I believe she's addressing item number 25. Would you stand for questions for later, ma'am, when we get to that point?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Close it out.
Yeah. Okay, next speaker request form. I guess I have no more speaker request forms for any items, numbers 5 through 26, 22 through 26, excuse me. Does anybody wish to speak on any of the items 22 through 26? No, none further. I will close public comment. And now I'll move on to item number 22. Ronna Graham, city roofing permit process and inspection concerns. She's here. Ma'am, you please approach the microphone. Good.
Hi, my name is Ronna Graham. I'm here again to question the professionalism of the staff amongst the planning department. I have had the report from the city attorney's office. There are some issues in there that I would like to question. I understand that the majority of it, they have gone in my favor, but there is also a lot of questionable stuff in their report also. For example, page 1, the second paragraph of the report, it states that the deck was not part of this investigation, but the city attorney fails to notice the reason I mentioned it was because, again, it was passed by the city on 3 occasions with no permit, against code violation, and not being built before signed off. The building services went against what they told myself and Alderwoman Doyle how they were going to deal with it. So in fact, this was not dealt with appropriately, and I was informed I could not claim for the deck in my interview, which is stated in the first paragraph of the actual city report. So that's one of the issues I have on there. Page 3 of the city report, the first one, dated January 2014. When I spoke with Building Services on February 3rd, 2014, I spoke with the girl in the office who confirmed a permit had been applied for, but had expired, so the city were under the impression that Lyndon Bolt had not done the job. She passed me to Brad Salon, who asked me what was going on and also confirmed that he also was under the impression the roof had not been completed due to the inspection or affidavit not being handed in. On 5/27 at 9:35, I contacted Allison Marsland, Assistant City Attorney, to ask for a copy of the letter that was supposedly sent to Bolt Construction, reference a follow-up on the actual permit. I have been told there is no copy of this. She could not, she did ask for one, but one was not taken, so she saw a copy to another contractor that was dated in February. I personally do not know if this actual letter was ever sent to Linden Bolt in order to follow up the permit that had expired. Page 3, dated February 4th, 2014. Letter sent to me by Linden Bolt stated he was giving me 7 days to pay or the mechanic's lien would be placed. I signed for this letter February 5th, 2014. The lien should not have been placed until February 12th, 2014, but instead was placed February 10th, as documented in items number 3, page 2, and items number 4 of my documentation. Page 3, February 13th, 19th, 24th, 2014, affidavit issued, permit would be finalized. The affidavit should not have been accepted as the date signed on the affidavit, October 15th, 2013, the same day as the permit was issued. Do I need to stop?
You can finish, just.
The same day as the permit was issued, 4 months after the job had been done with no valid permit, and the building services knew there were code violations but still accepted the affidavit. Is this not against the city code or policy also? Page 3, April 11th, 2014, I filed a claim with Risk Management, which I was told I could only claim for my attorney's costs and would be contacted by the insurance department within a few days. I have still not heard from anyone from the insurance department. Page 4, second and third paragraph. I did mix up my dates and informed Allison straight after the first meeting on April 2nd that I had messed up my dates when I had approached here. I mean, this was my first time ever doing anything like this. So I also informed Keith from Risk Management of this in my meeting with him and Alderwoman Doyle, that the reason I believe Chuck had contacted Linden Bolt and informed him of the timing of the lien was because I had told Chuck and Mike on February 5th, 2014, that Linden Bolt threatened to place a lien on me if not paid by the 2nd of February, or the 12th of February, 2014. But I had spoken with the Register of Deeds, who told me the contractor only had 120 days, which meant after Monday, the 10th of February, he could not place a lien on me. That was when Chuck responded with, Linden is a friend of his and a good guy. It wasn't until my conversation with Sergeant Sue Fox on the 3rd of, on March 7th, 2014, when she contacted me and informed me that Linden had informed her the only reason he did the lien the way he did was because he had been contacted and told the time scale for placing lien had been changed, so he had no choice. It was when I got the document number 9 that I noticed as soon as Chuck left my house, this was on the second inspection of my house, he contacted Linden immediately and believed that since he had already informed me of his friendship with Linden Bolt and that I had told him about the 120 days to place the lien, that Chuck was the one who contacted Linden. I did not state, as it's stated in the city attorney's investigation, what Chuck had said to Linden in their telephone conversation, as I was not there to hear this. That is now the personnel placing words into my mouth as stated in the investigation. I would like to know why on the 12th of February, as soon as Chuck did leave my house, he contacted Linden Bolt and asked him for an affidavit, as there was already code violations been placed that day, and an affidavit, which is in the city attorney's investigation, is supposed to state that the work has been completed and in a satisfactory manner, and an affidavit was asked for even though they knew the code violations existed. Page 4, last paragraph of the city attorney's report. If Linden Bolt was aware of the timescale to place a lien, then why did he originally give me until the 12th of February to pay him, but instead place the lien 2 days earlier on the 10th of February? This is part of my issue, as this report is basically going after the contractor and stating that myself and the contractor are responsible to sort it out ourselves. But the city have admitted in this report that they are liable. They're just not claiming responsibility for their actions that they took in this. Page 5, first paragraph, I understand that the report states personal actions are being taken which are private and confidential, but it has now come to my attention more documents relating to my case have disappeared. And what this is about is the copy of the letter that was supposed to have been sent to Lyndon Bolt following up on the permit issue. And last Thursday, when I came in to collect photographs from the city attorney's office that were supposed to be issued with the affidavit, I questioned them because the roof was covered in snow. And when they did my roof, there was no snow on it. So when I went into the planning department and asked them if they had the original copies with dates and timestamps on it, I was actually very rudely treated by the same planning officer that I complained about, Chuck. I went in, and I can understand that I have logged a complaint about him and if he doesn't want to serve me, but he completely ignored me and didn't say, excuse me, someone else will help you. He walked away, spoke to the girl behind the counter, whispered something into her, and walked out of the room. She then came up and stated that Brad would actually come out and help me. Now, what the discussion with Brad was is when I showed him the pictures, he asked what they were. I said, well, these are supposed to be the pictures that were requested to go with the affidavit. He said, no, those aren't the ones. I've seen them. The pictures that were issued with the affidavit were of showing a complete view of your house, and it was a nice, clear day. And when I questioned him about these pictures being issued with the affidavit, he said, yes, they were issued with the affidavit. I said, well, can you go back to the April 2nd Legal and Finance meeting where you actually stated to the board there were no pictures issued with the affidavit whatsoever? He then changed his attitude and his mind and stated, oh, yes, I forgot. When I asked him for a copy of these photos, he has no idea where they are. He can't remember who showed them, and they've disappeared also. So I spoke with Allison because at first Brad said that she had all the photos and she knew nothing about these other photos that were involved. The pictures that the city have accepted as proof that my roof was done completely, or should I say, are the ones with snow. They're not showing the ice shield, which is what the city require. It doesn't show the structure of my house, and it also does not show the structure of the street where my house is positioned, which is what the city require on these pictures, but they still accepted them. On page 5, the first paragraph in the city report, titled "The Fraudulent Mechanics Lien," states that Lyndon Bolt informed his accounting firm to use his stamp to sign the lien, but this statement is false, as in the police report, number 17, page 1 of 1, third paragraph. Colleen Schote didn't recall a specific conversation with Lyndon Bolt before she stamped the document. She assumed Allison had specifically talked to Lyndon, and Allison is his secretary. On page 6, second paragraph below, remedy Lyndon Bolt admitted the work was commenced prior to obtaining a permit. I feel a double fee is not sufficient, as Lyndon Bolt has shown several acts of dishonesty and fraud already, and issuing him this fine is basically letting him get away with lying and going against city policy. Page 7, it is stated Brad Salon issued Lyndon Bolt an expired permit letter, which I've gone over. Again, this is nowhere to be found. Page 7, list of the inspection report, shingles sealing well. This is not the case, and I took several pictures yesterday while Alderwoman Doyle was present with Nate Schwepp of Pro Exteriors lifting the shingles straight up off my roof. You can actually see he can lift the whole lot of shingles directly up all the way around my roof. So the inspection team did not inspect the roof thoroughly. He didn't have to pry them. They came straight up, and like I said, Alderwoman Doyle was actually present in that. One of the reasons the investigation was ordered was due to the behavior of the city staff. Chuck acted like the two contractors who did the reports didn't know how to do their job, and I feel the staff who did this investigation have acted the same way, as in page 8, second paragraph. By not taking the word of the contractors as they would gain financially is what they state over shiners that were located on the roof. Well, hasn't it been proven that the building services have made numerous mistakes already and that this should have been checked again? Because the contractors state that there's enough shiners to warrant an issue with the roof, and the inspection team only said they saw 2. But again, they did not look over the whole roof. Page 10, second paragraph, below visible hail damage. It is stated that it is a gutter apron, not flashing. Now, I Googled this, and I also had the several contractors actually explain to me and Alderwoman Doyle, the meaning of flashing is flashing helps prevent leaks behind the gutter that cause damage to the fascia. 2 kinds of flashing trim, gutter apron and drip edge. So this is actually city code required. Also, Keith informed me, Lyndon told him and Allison in his interview, which Allison informed me of as well, that Lyndon stated, I did not request my guttering to be changed. If you look at document number 5 in my documentation, estimates and invoices, it clearly shows an itemized cost of replacing gutter and the invoices charging me for them. But the city took his word for it, which is in the report. Page 11, second and third paragraph, this goes to show, again, what I explained earlier about the structure. So I'm quite concerned at the documentation that the city are allowing from this contractor, but I also have to inform you that on February the 18th, I sent Lyndon Bolt a letter registered stating he was not allowed on my property, as the police had advised me to do this since I had filed fraud charges against him. It was a no trespassing letter for him and his company. And on on April the 22nd, when Lyndon Bolt had his interview with Allison and Keith, they again requested photos, even though we had already found that there were no photos supplied with the affidavit. And so this meant that they needed to get on my roof to get photos. And on April 23rd is the day they supplied the photos covered in snow. I have been to the police. They are looking into trespassing charges against Bolt Construction. So I feel that if the city hadn't kept pressuring him to provide pictures that they knew didn't exist, I wouldn't have had someone trespass onto my property where my elderly mother lives with me, who actually is now feeling intimidated that people can come onto your property like that. Page 15, first paragraph under conclusion regarding current policy, roofing permit regulations were put into place in order to protect the public from the so-called fly-by-night companies. What regulations have been put in place to protect the public from local companies who do not follow city policy, cheat, lie, and steal from the public? I went into detail of the behavior of Chuck on 522. I also have issues on the fact that I don't feel like this investigation has really been investigated. I think they did interviews, but no serious investigation took place. And again, I have my concerns just about the city staff. Today when I was sitting outside, one of the other inspectors who came to my house for these inspection team, he came up the stairs, and instead of having manners and just saying hello because I was standing right at the door, he threw me a dirty look and just walked in. And I'm sorry, but that is not an appropriate way to behave. When my husband had his interview with Keith, I also told Keith that I was trying to open up a new business, and I was concerned at how the city inspection team were going to treat me due to this complaint. He told me they had to have an amount of professionalism. And so far, since this complaint, I have not had professionalism from the city department at all, except for a gentleman named Kurt, who has actually tried to help me with the new business.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, do I have any lights from any council members? Mr. Landine, do you have a recommendation for a motion? No, we're on the item, actually. You can speak. Chair recognizes Mr. Jerry Wright.
I have a question on the statement by Officer Sue Fox, which included something to the effect that the statement was made about the lien. Was that ever included in the investigation, or did we talk to her, or do we have that police statement?
Yeah, Allison interviewed Sue Fox. Sue Fox does not recall ever telling that. Several of the conversations she had, both with Ms. Graham and with Lyndon Bolt, were recorded. Allison has listened to the recordings of those conversations, and those were not, there was no statement made about the lien by Mr. Bolt. Officer Fox does not recall him making any statement regarding the lien, and she does not recall Ms. Graham, or telling that to Ms. Graham. And in the recording of the phone call between Sue Fox and Ms. Graham explaining the results of the investigation, no such comments were made.
And no statements to that effect was reflected in the police statement or report, or was there a formal report written?
I guess I don't know if there was I would defer to Allison if there was a formal police report written. It's my understanding that after looking into it, the state's attorney's office declined to pursue the matter.
There is a formal police report, and there isn't any mention of a statement of Lyndon Bolt telling Sue Fox that Lyndon Bolt was told by a third party to meet some expedited lien filing deadline.
Okay. The other question if I may
Sure.
make the comment on this issue, I'm sitting up here feeling like we're either a magistrate court judge or a jury to decide a multi-litigious type environment. I'm not prepared to make any decisions today. I'm sure no one else is, but I think we need to look at this and find out what's really going on.
Can I just say something about the
Can or not?
question?
Just
No,
Sorry.
ma'am,
Sorry.
he has the floor.
I'll ask you if you want to. I think we've heard a lot, and I'm not trying to put you aside, but I just think this is a very complex issue. I'm very uncomfortable that there's statements being made publicly. This is a live broadcast about employees or yourself or contractors, and I don't know if this is exact. I think we may be going a step too far, and I would like to refer this to council Monday night with a recommendation, and then possibly go into executive session with our council to determine what we should do on this issue.
You can't make a motion at this point.
So we have a motion to refer this to attorney for discussion on Monday night?
I'll recognize Charity Doyle next if you're done. Charity?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chair, and if I may retain the floor.
Motion by Doyle, second by Peterson to send
Thank
it.
you. And just for Ms. Graham's understanding, we're just referring this to council without recommendation, which means we won't be sending any formal recommendation based on the massive amount of information today to council. We'll potentially be discussing this with our legal counsel. But I just have to say, my original concern when this came forward was that this has happened with the same permitting issue to one person multiple times. How many other people is it happening to, and they're just unaware? I think that we do have a problem here. No one should have to go through this much work to try to get a resolution when the city permitting process and inspection process has been put in place. And it doesn't matter if it's, well, you know, we're going to do our best. It's like I've had the conversation multiple times with Mr. Solon, that the public expectation is that when the city signs off on anything, that it has been done properly. So I just, you know, I thank you, Rana, Ms. Graham, for bringing this forward, because I know so many people back off. They don't want to take on the city. They don't think that they can get anything done. And there's a lot of problems we don't hear about because people don't want to, they don't want the fight, or they don't want to be called whiners or complainers or troublemakers, and you're really putting yourself out there to do this. But it's been made perfectly clear by the extensive report that was done that we do have problems, and most of which what you brought forward has been founded. So it's not like you're making anything up. But I do have some concerns about the report itself. First of all, and just to reiterate one point, that the issue brought forward by the complainant was to look at the whole permitting and inspection process based on her multiple experiences. So it bothers me that the deck issue, the previous issue, was dismissed and not looked at within that larger context, because it was part of a pattern, I believe. My question, I do have a question for Mr. Lesperance, if I may.
By all means.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Keith. I know this was a pretty convoluted issue to try to unravel and get a handle on, but the complainant has stated multiple times that she was never contacted by the insurance company. So my question for you is twofold. One, did the claim get filed? And who is it up to decide which portions of the complaint get to be part of that process? Like we stated earlier, the deck issue was dismissed.
To answer your first question, yes, the report has been filed. The claim has been filed with One Beacon Insurance Company.
Okay.
The assigned claims rep is John Roy. And I have forwarded everything to him.
Okay, and do we know why
I was not
she's
aware
not been contacted yet?
until 5 minutes ago. I was not aware that John had not contacted Mrs. Graham.
Okay, so that's not on us.
Because when I talked to John, I said, make sure that you get in contact with Mrs. Graham.
Would it be okay to ask you to put in a friendly phone call to see if we could
Oh, absolutely.
facilitate
When
that?
I leave here, I will. That's one of the first phone calls I'm going to make when I get back to my office.
Thank
Yes,
you
ma'am.
very much, Keith. That's all I have for you. But one other concern I have about this report is that I remember the Legal and Finance meeting very distinctly, and that Mrs. Graham did not mention the roofer's name or the builder's name at that time. I'm concerned that the city brought those names into this. And obviously, in this case, those claims were mostly founded. But what if they hadn't been? I mean, I'm thinking, we have a lot of good people out there, and there's these disputes between contractors and property owners, probably more frequently than we're aware of. But this roofer's name or the builder's name, if these claims had been unfounded, would have been unnecessarily dragged through the mud. So that, just the way it was handled, I think that concerns me a bit. Also, that this report indicated that 2 independent and unrelated roofers gave the report that the roof is installed improperly simply because they wanted the job. I don't think that's fair for us as city officials to assume. They gave essentially the same report from what I understand, and aside from shouldering them with reputation they don't deserve, it baffles me because the city claims that it can't do the job properly to inspect these roofs because of a whole host of reasons, most of which are valid, yet the same staff claims that any roofer doing an inspection is merely doing it for financial gain and hoping to win the re-roofing job. And so I'm trying to put myself in the position of the homeowner, and I don't know what recourse a homeowner has in this case. What do we expect them to do? Can't rely on the city, we can't rely on the roofers because they just want money. And when we add to that the fact that the report does find that the complaints were founded. So what these independent roofers said was accurate. It just baffles me that we put that kind of a label or negative error around these 2 particular roofers. But my biggest concern is that we are leaving the homeowners absolutely unprotected. So I realize we don't do reports like this every day, but I think that there's a lot to probably learn from this. I'm sure we'll be discussing it a lot more Monday. And then I think it's going to be rhetorical at this point, but I want my colleagues and staff to be thinking about this. What are the permit fees for? I mean, we're charging this now. I know that it's helped with the fly-by-night issues, but you've got to put yourself in my shoes for once in answering to the public. We're paying these fees, but yet the job's not being done. And when we talk about the things that need to be done to inspect it properly, we're given reasons why that can't be. Opening up the city for liability. There's just all these reasons why we feel, not we, me, but we, the city, feels that we cannot actually properly and thoroughly inspect these jobs that are being done. So I do think that we need to have that discussion. And my last question, and I'm not sure who this would be directed to, it might actually be Mr. Solon, might be Ms. Marsland. What process would this property owner, she's asked me several times and I've forgotten to ask you, to go through to initiate a query into whether this roofer should remain licensed or not? Can either of you answer that?
The building official does have the authority to review complaints from citizens about licensed contractors and make a determination as to whether or not action on the contractor's license would potentially be warranted.
Actually, the Building Code Board of Appeals.
How
Well, the
would-
Building Code Board of Appeals would review Brad Solin's action if it was appealed.
But that would be the process. They're the licensing entity.
Okay, so basically the homeowner would state her request or her desire for this. Mr. Solon would make the determination of whether or not to put that through the process?
I would have to look at specifically I haven't looked at the process but yeah, there is a process for citizen complaints for licensed individuals, and the board that ultimately would review that is, all those boards got condensed into the building
Right.
board, so that is, I'm pretty sure, the licensing board ultimately for that. But I will say that I would find it, unless there are more complaints, I don't think it's likely, but ultimately that would be up to the board, that they would probably revoke somebody's license over
Well, this is
a single
just the
roof or a
process.
customer. Yeah.
Asking the question, is that information that you can get
Yeah,
to Mrs.
yes,
Graham?
we can certainly get that to Ms. Graham.
Okay. I yield the floor. Thank you.
Mr. Landine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just say a couple things to put this in perspective. The building services division has done approximately 800 plus roofs last year. There's 2 complaints that I would say rise to this level at this point, this claim, and then there was another homeowner who had a lot of disputes with her contractor, and it actually did go to the Building Code Board of Appeals. It wasn't just limited to the roof, and ultimately I think there were similar situations, some things that were found to be valid, some that weren't, and it was, honestly at this point I don't even know if that one is completely resolved yet, but out of 800 there's 2 complaints to rise to that level. Now I will acknowledge there are probably other complaints out there that we just aren't aware of or that people didn't pursue, but I think that kind of puts it in perspective when you look at the overall process, that really I'm aware of 2 complaints like this on that level. As far as the deck, one of the problems with the deck is that we didn't ever see what happened to it. By the time we got back out on site, the deck had already been rebuilt. So it would have been very hard for us to determine what happened or what even went wrong at that point. As far as filing the permit before the railing was up, I'm just speculating here, but I would imagine that when it's close, that happens all the time, because if they didn't, you'd probably be hearing from contractors quite often because their project was held up because one little minor thing was left to be done, and when everything else is already done and appears to be done correctly, they trust the contractor to finish it at that point. They've gone out, they've looked at it, the contractor is basically complete. There's a few things left to do, and everything's been done up to this point. As Alderman Lewis pointed out at agenda review the other day, these inspectors have relationships with contractors and may feel a comfort level with certain contractors. That doesn't mean that it's impossible that something won't go wrong or something won't happen and the deck failed or the railing failed. But again, we didn't have a chance to see it, so it's really hard for us to even know what happened with the deck at that point. As far as the statements about the contractors, and we can quibble over the wording. It certainly, I don't think, was the intent to suggest that for sure that they weren't being honest because of the financial gain. I think the statement was simply placed in the report to recognize the fact that we had a dispute of opinion between staff. I think it's inaccurate to say that all of the claims of the 2 independent roofing contractors were validated. What was validated is that the starter course was not done per manufacturer's instructions. And even that is my understanding there is some disagreement on, because what they did, they cut down, I think, the architectural shingles and used those as a substitute for the starter course, which some people would view as being acceptable, but but technically that is not in compliance with the manufacturer's instructions, and since that is one of the requirements, that's why there was a finding made. Mr. Bolt admitted that it was not done per the manufacturer's instructions because there wasn't a provision for or equal, and frankly, even if there had been, there'd probably be a dispute about whether or not that was or equal, but there would be a difference of opinion on it. The nail holes, there was a difference of opinion of staff and the independent contractors on that. And because judging the credibility, there are motivations for both sides, it was determined they really couldn't validate that or not. It's going to be a subjective, what is an acceptable level of the heads poking through and what isn't. There's going to be a certain amount in every job, and there was a dispute. So I think the point of the report was we couldn't determine whether or not. They certainly recognized that the contractors did have a motivation, financial gain, to argue that the entire roof, that there was too many and that they would need to redo the entire roof. I think it's important to recognize that. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were definitely doing that. It's just trying to judge the credibility of the people. Now, I think there was one other item I wanted to cover. Again, I think for the council, the big thing is really going to be, and the issue you really have to struggle with, is that there is an expectation when the city signs off on a permit of what's being done and how do you want to proceed with the roofing permits moving forward. And I don't think it's as easy or simple as just saying, let's dedicate more staff and go up on the roof and do a more detailed inspection. Some of these things you could only determine, the starter course, honestly, you could only determine that was wrong by going up on the roof. And the only way we knew it was wrong was because of all the complaints. They did go up on the roof, and the independent contractors actually removed the shingles and were able to expose it. But just viewing it from the street, it wouldn't have been visible or obvious that was wrong, which is the only inspection we do. You pointed out that there's a permit fee paid. The reason the permit fee is only $40 is because it's only a $40 inspection. If you want people up on the roof, if you want people that are trained to know all the different manufacturer requirements, you're not going to have a $40 permit fee anymore. You're going to have a $500 or $600 permit fee. And then you've got all kinds of staffing issues. Part of the reason that this was set up the way it was set up is because you have periods of time after a storm where everybody is working into the night, on weekends, 24 hours a day, trying to get roofs done. And you're going to need to have a lot of staff who are trained and know what they're doing during that period of time. And then when that period's over, there's going to be nothing for these people to do. So how do you staff that? Because you're going to have really busy periods, and then it might be a year or year and a half before you need all those people again. So it's going to be very difficult to staff. And the question is, are you better off with nothing, with what we're doing, or if we can figure out some way to staff it and dedicate the resources to going up on the roof, are you better off doing that? But I think if you do that, you're going to find out, you think 2 complaints now is bad, you're going to get a lot more complaints, because I will virtually guarantee you that even if you have 10 inspectors and they're going up on the roof and they're looking at everything and they know what the manufacturer's requirements for all the shingles are and they're making sure that everything's done to the manufacturer's specifications, you're still going to have a handful of people who are not satisfied with the job that was done on the roof. So you are also going to set up disputes between staff and roofers, which I think we haven't seen as much in the last few years, but I've seen in the past where there's a dispute between staff and a engineer or a contractor about how to design something or how to build something, and they have a difference of opinion. And basically, you're going to probably have roofers coming in saying, the staff guy is telling me I need to build this roof this way, and I disagree with them. And you are going to be asked to deal with complaints between contractors and staff over how to build roofs. And I think that's one of the consequences I foresee. I mean, there's any number of issues with going forward and doing more detailed inspections. But I also appreciate from your perspective that the public has a perception that if we're going to inspect a roof and we're going to sign off on a permit, we better not be doing that unless the permit's correct. And I don't know that I have a great answer for how we address those issues and still fulfill that expectation. But I don't want anyone to be under the illusion that it's going to be an easy fix. And it's going to cost money if you want to have more detailed inspections.
Thank you, Mr. Landine. Chair recognizes Bonnie Peterson.
Thank you. There's definitely light's been shown on some issues that the city has. And as Joel pointed out, we had a couple of complaints out of a lot. Our people in our city workers, they deal with thousands of people a year, and we get very few complaints. So we know that overall things are going pretty well. It's not perfect by any means, but going pretty well. However, I do have some concerns apparently of lost documents, especially documents that were complaints. I believe I read that in the report. It sounds to me that our staff needs training on how to better deal with the public, especially for people that have complained about them. I know as a nurse, I can have a patient complain about me, and I still need to continue taking care of them. And so, we need to get past that, and and then I know the attorneys kind of sometimes get involved, and they'll say, well, don't talk to someone if they've complained, or whatever. That complicates human relations. So we definitely, I think we need to beef up our customer service training for everyone, and especially dealing with people that, that there's been some kind of conflict with, because that's the professional thing to do. When I was on the council in 2010, when I believe the ordinance to put the roofing ordinance in place, and it was a local contractor that had really mishandled a roof that we thought was very unsafe. And so it's not just to regulate out-of-towners. It's to try to make sure there's some level of safety, not probably perfection, but some level of safety for future, for inhabitants. My biggest concern, one is that I think we need to clarify in our ordinance exactly what pictures need to be taken, so there's no questions about that or any other rules that we put into place. And somehow I feel that the bigger problem, obviously the building permit issue is a big problem, but also is how do our departments self-regulate so that Ms. Graham could have been taken care of without this coming to council. And obviously you get, with the complaints you have, and I know people, just being on the council, people will call and complain without knowing really all the rules or what's happened. Just recently the council got a scorning email about how we had changed things and how we should all be ashamed of ourselves, even though four of us voted on their side, but they were scolding everybody. So, I know people do that, and they scold or scorn the person they shouldn't be. So I know that is an issue. But I guess my thing is, why wasn't Ms. Graham's roof inspected more closely before it got to us? Why was it treated the way it was? And I guess that's what kind of system, internal review system or whatever, can you put into place where you're looking at yourself and self-improving? And I don't know if that means mixing up different groups of people to look at it, but how can you self-regulate so that you're self-learning, so you don't have to come to mom and dad to settle the dispute or whatever, so that I think that's something that needs to be done. And I think that's it, but we can all learn. We all strive to do well every day, but some days we fall short on it. So it's not, I'm not trying to pick on our staff or department heads. I'm just saying, what does the system need so that the system operates at its highest level? Does it need another staff person? Does it need the customer service training, which I think is a definite yes? What do you need to do so that you have a great, give great service? And anyway, thank you very much.
Kumbaya. Okay, Chair recognizes Jerry Wright.
Thank you. I was hoping we'd have more of this discussion Monday night, but since it's gone this far, I have to add some things to this. It appears that we do have a customer relations issue here. And I think that's tied into a lot of things, and that's one of the issues that I've, as President of Council, have asked the mayor to meet with him to discuss how we can enforce better customer relations and how we can let our staff know that we'll support them, and we'll also support our constituents. We represent all sides, both sides, everybody. In a situation like this, I know having been around one of the most controversial services the city provides, mistakes are made. You may have 18,999 customers and one unhappy, but we need to address that one unhappy person. And we need to do it with the feeling that we can do it without retribution. And if we make a mistake because we're trying, it needs to be respected. And I think we need to encourage our staff to do that. I think probably some customer relations training or enforcement. I know it was a big deal years ago. I assume it should be, if it isn't now, be brought up. But I think that that's where an area we need to go, and I think in our discussion on Monday night would be appropriate to bring that in. But I do firmly believe that the city, if we issue a permit for something, we have an obligation to the public to make sure that that item that is being permitted is being done properly and in accordance to our specifications and the standards that we live by. If we're not doing our job, and we're getting a false sense of assurance to our clients, or our citizens. It doesn't just fit roofs. It fits concrete footings and walls. I mean, is the reinforcement in the right? Is the contractor placing the right PSI concrete and that kind of stuff? Sewer, water, and heating, and all those things that are out there. Multitude of things that we have issues. Fire inspections. A lot of things we do that people trust that we're doing right, and that we have to do that. Our staff also needs to know we're going to back them. To make a mistake because you're trying is acceptable. If you're making repeated mistakes, maybe you need another career field. But I'm basically saying our staff needs to know that if they're doing their job diligently and professionally, that we're not going to hack them apart politically. And that may be part of what's contributing to this issue. I don't know. But we need to talk about it at the mayor's level and our level and with the directors. But I look forward to maybe some more discussion on Monday night. We can move on and resolve this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. And I don't normally speak as a chair, but I do feel uniquely qualified in this position as a contractor. One thing I will say is that, there's a lot of stuff been said about manufacturers' requirements and requirements for starter strips and things like that. I can assure you folks that a lot of that's in the paperwork because people like Mr. Landine exist in this world. Nothing against lawyers, but manufacturers are always looking for an out. And so I can assure you that I probably built many houses that have done it, and I guarantee you look around Rapid City that a lot of houses are done with starters that are not manufacturer style requirements, but it doesn't mean they're any less solid as far as their construction goes. You go around, the old school boys all do it that way. Now, whether or not that's right according to the manufacturer specs, I don't know, but the same thing happens with siding all the time too. There's starter strips you can buy for siding, but they get damaged in the field really easy, and they're a pain in the butt to work with, to be honest with you. So guys will just cut a piece of siding and start with that and strips, and it doesn't make it any less effective. It's just a different way of doing things. So those kind of accusations I'm not sure I agree with. And as far as I have more reason to complain about a lot of the things in field with inspectors, whatnot, if I wanted to, because that's my field I'm in, and contractors like to complain a lot, trust me. But, generally speaking, our staff has done a pretty good job as far as, allowing a deck railing to go on prior to construction. You do have those kind of relationships where they learn that you have to earn their trust. I mean, if you screw them over, they're going to remember it, and next time you're going to get the full Monty when it comes to the inspection. They're going to make sure that everything you do is right. But when you establish a level of trust, they know that you build right, they're going to let you do it. And that's part of making the process continue on. And otherwise, you'd be stuck there all day long trying to build a house, and would never get done. So I think we have to allow for some of those accommodations in the field. I mean, I'd question how many actual catastrophic failures we've had of construction in this city based upon an inspector missing something. I'm not aware of very many, if any, other than a couple that have been mentioned here. And I'm not defending the staff overly. I just think that it would be nice to hear their side of the story too, because all we've heard is Mrs. Graham's side of the story, and I understand that's obviously, valid because she's a citizen and she has a right to, but I also don't think it's fair to just let one person say their side publicly and then other people have to take it. Whether I agree with either side is not the point. I just think it's out of fairness. And if you want to wait till Monday night where you can do that, but I would urge anybody who wishes to speak on the subject to step forward. Anyway, any further discussion? Do we have a motion on this subject? Okay, what is the
We
motion?
do, Mr. Chair, to send to council.
Council without recommendation, okay. It's a long way to go for that motion. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Moving on, item number 23. Amazing. Miss Heather Thompson is going to make a presentation for us from the Rapid City Indian Boarding School lands. Ma'am, if you would approach the microphone, and you have the floor.
Do they have the handouts, do you know? Sent this in an email?
Do you guys have the handouts that were sent?
They're attached to the agenda, okay. Yeah. Okay, great, the maps and stuff, great.
If you have any extra material you'd like to distribute, ma'am. Heather, do you have some
sorry,
other
sir?
stuff? Do you have some extra on that?
I do
Never
have
mind.
some extra ones.
Jerry's just wandering around. Thank you very much. And
And
the
we have
floor,
extra copies if anybody in the audience wants to follow up.
Heather, if you could please identify yourself as well before you speak. Thank you.
You bet. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. My name is Heather Dawn Thompson, and I'm accompanied by Ms. Gay Kingman, who is the Executive Director for the Great Plains Tribal Chairmen's Association. I apologize, I'm nervous and I'm so excited to be here with you guys today. What we're going to be talking and sharing with you today is a little bit of history of some of the land in Rapid City, specifically where the Rapid City Indian Boarding School used to be, and a request at the end of our presentation to be passed on to council for full council approval of our request to transfer or more specifically amend some of the title of this land. So just to give you a quick background as to why we became interested in this, I'm here in my personal capacity, but just coincidentally, I also sit on the Parks and Rec Board for the city. Oh, thank you. And during some conversations in front of our board last summer, there became a number of questions about what was and what was not Indian land previously in Rapid City, within city limits. And just in my personal capacity, I'd heard several conversations about this as well. So unfortunately, being a lawyer, as Chad has already made his, or the chairman's already made his position very clear on lawyers, I decided I actually have the capacity to figure this out. So I spent many unfortunate hours in the deeds office downtown in Rapid City doing a lot of research to kind of get answers, not only for our committee, but for the community as a large, and of course, for the tribes as well. And so what you see in front of you in the first handout, and is reflected in the board map that you have as well, is essentially the outlines of what used to be the Rapid City Indian Boarding School lands. And to just put that briefly into perspective, as many of us in South Dakota are aware, in 1868 there was a treaty that was signed between the federal government and the tribes that allocated certain lands to the tribes. At that point in time, it was essentially everything that was West River. After that time period, as we know, gold was discovered in our area, and that land transitioned primarily into private ownership.
However, there were still a number of responsibilities that the federal government had within that treaty, and number one being education of the tribal communities. And so in the late 1800s, the federal government started to establish approximately 40 boarding schools nationwide. And one of them was placed here in Rapid City. You might be more familiar with a more famous one called the Carla Indian School, which was in Pennsylvania and was where Jim Thorpe went. But the Rapid City Indian Boarding School was essentially a part of that national infrastructure to follow through on the treaty obligations to provide education to the Indian people. In the 1890s, in order to follow through on this, the federal government purchased approximately 1,200 acres within Rapid City, or what is now Rapid City. Those are the borders that you see in red in the map that's up on the board and that's in front of you. That land was utilized for the Rapid City Indian Boarding School from approximately 1900 to 1930. In 1930s, the federal government decided that the program of bringing all the children off the reservations into boarding schools was not the best policy, and they disestablished most of those boarding schools. At that point in time, the Rapid City Indian Boarding School became what is now known as Sioux-San, or Sioux Sanitarium. And it was primarily, if not exclusively, for Indian patients that had tuberculosis. And this was from approximately 1930 to 1960. After that time period, it became a hospital of general administration, as you know, for Indians in the Indian healthcare system, and that's what it continues to operate as today. So how did this land transfer out of use for the tribal communities? In approximately 1947, 1948, you'll have in your second handout, I realize when I'm looking at it, it actually is quite difficult to read. I apologize. I do have an original of that. You'll see an article in the Rapid City Journal. This was approximately the same time period that Rapid City moved to annex the western portion of the city. And along with that, the City of Rapid, the school board, the National Guard, and the Catholic Church lobbied the U.S. Congress to allow the federal government to provide these lands in grants to those entities. That legislation passed in 1948, and essentially what it did allow was that the federal government could grant lands to the city, and they did so. That was about 200 acres that became Sioux Park, to the school district, and they did so, and that's now Canyon Lake Elementary, West Middle School, and Stevens High School, to the National Guard, and they did so. In the darkened portions on the left of the map, you'll see the National Guard training camp area. That's approximately 600 acres. And then to sell to churches, and they did so. There were approximately 10 churches that purchased lots. Only approximately 3 of them still own those lots. The rest of the churches sold them for housing, and that's why you'll see all the housing in this area as well. And then there was a second provision that allowed the land to be of use for quote-unquote needy Indians, which was probably appropriate nomenclature at the time. That provision, unfortunately, from the tribal community's perspective, was actually never utilized. So all of this land, approximately 1,000 to 1,100 of the original 1,200 acres, passed out through the other provisions to the other non-Indian entities. The reason why I put the third picture in here, which is Sioux Addition, is this helped solve a mystery, at least for myself, that you may have heard in your capacity as council people as well, is Sioux Addition and how Sioux Addition came about. And that is land that is now north of the city that is largely a Native American population. And it was somewhat to my surprise that it was actually related to this whole land deal in the 1950s. There was a movement, this is probably before all of our time, but there was a movement at that point in time for a portion of these lands to be set aside for quote-unquote needy Indians, specifically for those Indian families that were living along the river at that point in time, for this to be a portion of it to be housing, so they could have housing. Unfortunately, that was very aggressively opposed by the citizens on the west side of the city, and so a complex land transaction occurred, which I'm happy to talk about in a different setting, in which the land north of the city that was outside of city boundaries was purchased, and then the Native families were moved there instead. So that brings us to here today. Why are we here today? We have a request of you. In the course of conducting this research, we found out some very important information. And most importantly is that there are 3 small plots of this original 1,200 acres that are still in federal trust. And most importantly to the Native community, one of those plots contains a cemetery. Unfortunately, it was not marked or preserved, but as children passed away during the time it was a boarding school and were unable to afford to go home, and as people died when it was a tuberculosis clinic and were unable to go home, they were buried in a cemetery across the street from Susan, which is behind West Middle School. Over history, the records have largely been lost, but there are still markers and indications as well as extensive oral history of the location. And we have since brought what are called tribal historic preservation officers, much like an archaeologist, that are expert at identifying grave sites and walk those grounds and identify the burials. We are so grateful that this land still is in federal ownership. It's not passed out to private ownership. But we are greatly concerned because it is not in what's called tribal trust. And so it is still vulnerable land, as any federal land is, that could be declared excess and pass out of protection. So there are currently 3 small pieces of land that the tribes would like to amend the title to and move from what's called a general federal trust of land, such as the National Forest Service or BLM. That's all sort of held in a general trust, and move it to what's called tribal trust land, and that's a much more protective status. It's not able to be sold, it's not able to be accessed, and it provides a much higher degree of protection for that land. The 3 pieces of land are the Susan campus, which many of you are familiar with when you drive by, where the Susan IHS hospital still is. This cemetery plot, which is behind West Middle School on the hill. This is recorded. This is recorded. We've kept that private information. I apologize. This is recorded, isn't it, in public? Anybody who just heard that, please respect the fact that this is a cemetery. And then the third portion is a small piece that's a hilly piece over on the wooded side by the National Guard camp. So those 3 small pieces, luck would have it, have not yet passed out through this legislation to private ownership. And so the tribes are going to go to the federal government, who owns it, and ask them to amend it and transfer it from this trust to a more protective trust. And so we come to you as friends first to respect our friendship and ask for your support as we go forward. We have already met with the mayor, and we will be meeting with the governor as well, hopefully. And make sure that that land is protected for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Does anybody have any questions for her? Chair recognizes Jerry Wright.
The burial grounds, are you going to need some assistance to designate and protect them?
We're at the most preliminary stages. I think that we, of course, would request any assistance that is available. What we've done so far is got IHS's permission to put up signs. So we now have signage up. We had a prayer service this weekend in order to recognize them, that they were there, and that's as far as we've gotten. So we certainly accept and appreciate any recommendations on further protecting those graves.
So at this point, you really want a motion from us to support your request to transfer it to tribal trust, correct?
Yes, sir, and to move us on to full council on Monday for the same request.
Since I've already spoke, I can't make that motion, but that's what I'd like to see us do.
Chair recognizes Bonnie Peterson. Look better at that placard.
I'd make a motion to have a resolution of support for moving to a higher level of support.
Are you hiding something?
Oh.
We have a motion. So the motion is to give support and send to council with it?
Yes.
You're not going to hit me with that thing, okay?
Okay.
Okay, is that the motion you're looking for, ma'am?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Okay. So go ahead.
Can I?
By all means, just have the
Thank
floor.
Okay. I wish you luck in that, and hopefully, you may have already worked with our staff to kind of more technically identify, just so that we have a better understanding as you move forward about exactly which lots that you're looking at, just because people ask us questions, and
Sure.
it just helps us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Jerry Wright.
Sorry, I'm a Rapid City guy for 66-plus years. I knew a lot of this history, but I didn't know it all. And I want to thank you for what you've done. And I would like to also see if you would work with our mayor and the Journey Museum and possibly put together a more formal display of what you have on this board that we could put in our lobby, and maybe also over at the Journey Museum so more people know this story. And I think that there's churches out there, of which I belong to one of them, has been the property beneficiary, that would love to know the history too. So I think outreach to them, and I could help you in some of those areas, but I think if we could have the display down in the lobby here, maybe at the Journey, to tell this fascinating story, it would be really, really good.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'd be honored to do so.
Any further discussion? Chair recognizes Bonnie Peterson, of course.
I just want you to know that my middle child is an attorney, and, they're just open up for jokes. But we all know that our rights that we have are only because of attorneys that have done work in the past. Thank you.
What? Who's suing you? Okay. Anyway, any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Motion carries. Item number 24 is Verla Crago, appeal of abatement in the sum of $172 for snow removal at 1016 Haynes Avenue. Chair recognizes somebody. Oh, Jeff Barbier, excuse me.
Thank you, Chairman. Verla Crago was not able to be here today. I did tell her that I wouldn't necessarily campaign on her behalf or against her, but I would bring the information to the committee. The situation was when our contractor did those other properties that we've seen along Haynes, we sent the trifold notices. On the Crago property, they had taken one shovel, probably 15 inches wide, and just made one pass up the middle of the sidewalk. The pictures are a little bit fuzzy, but that's what they show you that are attached. So our contractor, while he was shoveling the other properties along Haynes, shoveled it the full width of the sidewalk. The reason the bill is $172 at this point is because it was it was $30 for the contractor's work to shovel, $42 for the admin fee, and then she did not pay it by the due date, so the $100 late fee has hit it. So I guess that's the story on this one.
Chair recognizes Steve Laurenti.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Barbier, if you can. I have just one question. How many days are they notified by mail? Let me ask that first. Maybe I have a couple questions.
Well, normally they're notified. For snow, the enforcement's a little bit different because the ordinance reads free from snow and ice at all times. We don't enforce it that way. What we do is after a storm, we would give people at least 24 hours. We wouldn't expect them to be out there in a blizzard. But usually we'll send notice. We'll try to give them at least a couple of days. We also use common sense. If it's going to be 60 degrees the next day, we're not going to be out there shoveling a lot of sidewalks. So it also depends where we get complaints. We get a lot of complaints from pedestrians, particularly around school zones about safety. So a lot of times those are a higher priority for our inspections.
Is this Verla Crago, does she live at that property?
Yes, she does.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
Once they're notified, how many days do they have before they get hit with a $100 late fee? Non-payment, how many days do they go by?
Does Pauline have, is it 15 days? I think it's 15's ringing a bell for me, but I don't know for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Chair recognizes Bonnie Peterson.
Thank you. Are they allowed to make payments? Pauline, I can't remember if, someone calls and says, hey, I can only pay $10 this week and I'll pay you the $10 a week for 6 weeks or something.
I will tell you that we try to work with individuals, especially those on fixed incomes. In fact, it wasn't a special assessment, but it was another issue that the attorney's office wrote up an agreement that I just signed the other day because they want to make payments because they're on a fixed income. So we try to work with them. However, depending on when they make the contact, they will still more than likely have to go on an assessment roll. That way we are guaranteed the payment. At no time, with these types of assessments, they're given a year to pay, period. And then it goes to the county and becomes a lien on their property. It's a one-time payment, and but we try to work with them as much as we can.
Okay, thank you.
I currently have no motions on the floor. Chair recognizes Bonnie Peterson.
I'll make a motion to waive the $100 late fee, and if I can get a second.
Second by Wright. You have the floor.
Okay, that's all. I just,
Chair recognizes Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I would just caution you on that because we have had hard costs associated with it. Once they don't pay their bill, and I sent an email down to my office to figure out how much time they have, then we start doing the assessment process, which includes staff time and includes publishing a few times. It includes certified mailings, and so there are hard costs associated with it. So I guess I would request that you not waive the $100 assessment that's tacked on because of those costs associated with the furthering of the assessment.
Okay. Chair recognizes no one. Okay. Motion on the floor is to waive the $100 fee. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Item number two. Oh,
ask for notice.
did you, any, sorry. Nays? So used to universal. Okay, we have one no from Laurenti. Motion passes 2-1. Any further discussion? I guess, never mind. Item number 25, excuse me, appeal of Historic Preservation Commission's recommended denial of siding and door replacement at 1107 Kansas City Street and 703 11th Street. Chair recognize. Anybody have any questions?
I'd make a motion.
A motion to deny the appeal by Wright, second by
Second.
Peterson. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Item number 26, second reading of recommendation of ordinance 5987 and regarding a supplemental appropriation number 2 for 2014. A motion by Peterson, second by Wright. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion by Laurenti, second by Peterson. All in favor say aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.